Welcome to Story Chat Radio. We are book editors Carly Hayward and Jenny Chappelle. Every month we watch a different movie with an eye for storytelling and novel writing.
We use our years of training and experience editing novels to break down each movie's storytelling elements to help you improve your novel in progress.
Warning, Jenny ruins everything.
Hey, you ruin things too.
So don't be surprised if there are spoilers.
On this episode of the podcast, we're discussing the live-action movie Barbie.
All right, Jenny, guess what?
What? Is this about Barbie?
No. It's our 4-year podcast anniversary.
What? That is not possible.
No.
There's no way that we've been doing this for 4 years.
I don't think so. Also, I didn't get you anything.
What even do you think is like the 4th year anniversary, like, gift theme? Let's go with plastic. Since
Plastic.
we're doing Barbie, we'll say it's
Oh my
plastic.
God. It's plastic. I love it. I didn't get you anything plastic.
Rude.
I know. You can deal. All right. Anyway, here come the spoilers. Stereotypical Barbie, aka from here on out to be referred to just as Barbie, is living her best life in Barbie Land, a matriarchal society populated by different versions of Barbies, Kens, and a group of discontinued models who are treated like outcasts due to their unconventional traits. While the Kens spend their days playing at the beach, the Barbies hold prestigious jobs such as doctor, lawyer, and politician. Beach Ken, aka Ken, is only happy when he is with Barbie and seeks a closer relationship, but Barbie rebuffs him in favor of other activities and female friendships. One evening at a dance party, Barbie is suddenly stricken with worries about mortality. Overnight, she develops bad breath, cellulite, and flat feet, disrupting her usual routines the next day. Weird Barbie, an outcast due to her disfigurement, tells her she must find the child playing with her in the real world to cure her afflictions. Ken stows away in her convertible to join her, to which Barbie reluctantly agrees. Arriving at Venice Beach, Barbie punches a man for groping her, leading to her and Ken's brief arrest. Alarmed by their presence, Mattel CEO, I can say that, orders their recapture. Barbie tracks down her owner, a tween girl named Sasha, who criticizes her for encouraging unrealistic beauty standards. Distraught, Barbie discovers that Gloria, a Mattel employee and Sasha's mother, accidentally caused the chaos by playing with Sasha's old Barbie toys in a similar state. Mattel attempts to put Barbie in a toy box for remanufacturing, but she escapes with Gloria and Sasha's help, and the three travel to Barbie Land with the Mattel executives in pursuit. But in the meantime, Ken learned about the patriarchy, which is a great sentence, and took over Barbie Land with the other Kens, leaving the Barbies in submissive roles like agreeable girlfriends, housewives, and maids. With the assistance of Sasha, Weird Barbie, and the discontinued dolls, they deprogram the Barbies and regain power. The Barbies resolve to rectify the faults of their previous society, emphasizing better treatment of the Kens and all outcasts. Barbie and Ken apologize to each other, acknowledging their mistakes. Ken bemoans that he has no purpose without Barbie, so Barbie encourages him to find his own identity. Barbie decides to become human and return to the real world. Jenny, what did you think of this movie?
Okay, so first, I just have to say that there's this quiet, subtle line at the end when Ken is, like, complaining about that he's not anything without Barbie, where he says that once he found out the patriarchy didn't have anything to do with horses, he lost interest anyway. And that has stuck with me since I first watched the movie, because I just find it, I don't know, so weirdly funny. I don't know.
It's very good.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure I would like this movie. When I first saw that there was going to be a new live action Barbie movie, I think I literally rolled my eyes. But I really, really did like it. And like when I saw some of the trailers, I was like, oh, well, this is maybe different than what I was expecting. So yeah, it definitely was more than I expected. And I'll say there are a few elements that I felt like could have been developed better.
Yeah.
And I also felt like it got a little preachy at times.
Yes.
Like, as much as I love America Ferrera and thought her character Gloria was great, I definitely found her, like, big speech about what it's like to be a woman, like, a little bit pandering.
Yep.
But the movie also has this really nuanced dialogue about the concepts surrounding gender. Like the difference in how Ken and Barbie perceived all of this unsolicited attention. You know, Barbie felt really violated and Ken was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And the idea that Barbie started as a feminist icon because she wasn't a baby doll. Like girls were really only playing with baby dolls before Barbie. And she allowed little girls to have imaginative play beyond the idea of being a wife and a mom because Barbie was neither one. So I grew up in the era of Barbie with like the impossible Barbie, the impossible body proportions and those early stirrings of like, maybe this isn't healthy for kids. And so that part of the movie and having all of these like, evolution in that kind of concept of gender as it relates specifically to Barbie really resonated with me because I've had a lot of conversations about language evolving and how things that used to be seen as progressive aren't anymore because we've grown past that particular need now.
Yes.
And like that's evolved into other needs. So yeah, you know, as soon as it started to like trigger my word nerd side, I was like, yes, I am in. So I love that they were able to make a movie that pays homage to, makes fun of, and points out the flaws of something that society has had this love-hate relationship with for a long time. And so beyond that, it was just a really fun movie. And it was this whole movie about women where no one had a romance. Which is kind of amazing. There were a lot of other like relational kinds of concepts in it between the mom and daughter, women as friends, those kinds of things, but no romance, which I thought was great. And yeah, so overall, I definitely think it lived up to the hype. What did you think?
Well, first of all, that is a really good point about words evolving and progressiveness developing. And I love how you put that because I completely agree. But let's be clear. I love this movie so much. The moment I heard Greta Gerwig had signed on to do a Barbie movie, I was completely sold.
Yeah.
We watched her version of Little Women, and I've been noticing a pattern with us. We tend to watch certain creators over and over, like Greta Gerwig. This is our second. Guillermo del Toro, I think we've done two or three.
Yeah.
Jordan
and
Peele,
I'd like to do more.
Yeah, I know, same. Jordan Peele, we've done two or three. Like, and I think it's because they all have something really interesting to say, something compelling.
Yeah.
We clearly have our favorite actors.
Sure.
So, you know. Anyway, this movie was wonderful. Sure, I agree. It was heavy-handed at times, and it is promoting, you know, a corporation and will sell tons of merchandise. I get that. Divorcing it from that, do I want a I Am Knuff hoodie? Yes, I sure do. Honestly, what got me with this movie was like the really crazy attention to detail.
Yeah.
Like I recognized outfits that my Barbies growing up had, ones that my mom had even saved from her childhood. So I have like generations of Barbies. There were tons of like tiny small plastic details, etc. It was just truly impeccably done.
I agree.
For a movie about a product, I don't think you could really ask for much more.
It's true.
Yeah, it was pure nostalgia also, but it was also diverse and poignant and funny. Anyway, I really liked it. I have all good things to say. So, Jenny, what's something this movie does well that writers can use in their own work?
Okay, so one thing that really stood out is how the writers used antagonistic forces. So an antagonist or an antagonistic force is really anything that creates an obstacle for the protagonist. The writers did some really interesting things with this in in the movie by making the main antagonistic force the patriarchy. Like it has a negative impact on everyone in the story. The human women, the people in Barbie land, even Mattel. I loved when all the Barbie stuff started becoming Ken toys, because while it was satire, anyone who has ever shopped for toys can absolutely tell you how gendered companies make them.
So dumb.
And it's very normal for little kids to be like, I can't go down that toy aisle. That's the boy or the girl toy aisle, whatever. So do I have mixed feelings about having to see corporations as the victims of patriarchy? Absolutely.
Sure.
But I also think there's some amount of truth to it. And
Yeah.
then there are also smaller antagonistic forces at play. So like the social structure of the quote unquote weird Barbies. And also Ken/the Kens are very much an antagonistic force, as well as Mattel. So even the separation of Barbie land and the real world. So yeah, lots of internal and external forces, antagonistic forces, just like internal and external conflict, and lots of different kinds for us to talk about.
Yeah. When I saw this movie, I immediately knew I wanted to do it for the podcast because it's wonderful. And B, I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Because, like, somehow we haven't talked about antagonistic forces specifically. And this movie did them really well. So, let's start by getting into the differences between an antagonist and an antagonistic force. Basically, an antagonist is a person, sort of, while an antagonistic force is anything that creates conflict for your character. Something that has a competing goal. Antagonistic forces are extremely, extremely varied. And honestly, you'll probably have many in your novel. The main one in this movie, as Jenny stated, is the patriarchy. It is the antithesis of Barbie and goes against everything she wants in life. But at the same time, it kind of defines her. So she has this really complex relationship with the patriarchy and fights back against it. Now, the main antagonists of this movie are, well, Ken and Mattel, as
Right.
Jenny said. Both of them give the antagonistic force a face. They represent the different aspects of the patriarchy and the need the patriarchy has to control Barbie, aka the feminine. Basically, an antagonistic force is what opposes your main character, be it an aspect of the world, a society, an enemy, a rival, or even your protagonist getting in their own way. But an antagonist is often the face or the person that represents the antagonistic force. Not every antagonistic force needs a face, but it can definitely be useful to give your character a person to kind of direct their ire towards. Basically, antagonistic force is like the ephemeral idea that opposes your character. The antagonist is the representation of that idea as a person. At least that's how I kind of like to think about it. Like, we all have antagonistic forces in our lives, things in our way, but it's rare that we have, like, a true villain in our lives. Like, we often create antagonists out of people in our lives because it's easier to direct that frustration at a person than it is to, like, direct it at the universe. And the same can be said for your main characters. Not to get into psychology again, overly so, but
I think that it can be really difficult to write a story with a non-person antagonistic force.
Yeah.
Without giving it that phase, because you can't fight a force specifically. So, you know, when
Unless
you,
it's like internalized.
yeah. And so like when you look at, like in school, when I remember like learning about conflict, and I literally only remember this because of going through it with my teenager who was in high school right now. But I remember learning about like the different kinds of conflicts, there being like, you know, man versus man, or like human versus human, or human versus himself, or, you know, human versus like nature, or something like those are kind of, you know, the main, or human versus society, those kinds of things. And so like whenever it's like human versus society, or like if there's like a big like evil corporation or something, there's almost always like one antagonist who represents that.
Exactly.
Because your protagonist needs someone to, you know, compete with, We need to be able to see that. So yeah, I like that idea of like them having a face. Ken was definitely like the face of the antagonistic force in this.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, right. So the story value of antagonistic forces is that they create conflict. So without antagonistic forces,
there we go.
Whew, the story would just be the main character has a goal and achieving it is super easy, the end.
Woohoo.
So stories like that are not very interesting to readers. We did an episode about conflict not too long ago, so I just want to do a quick recap here because it's an essential element to understanding antagonists. Conflict comes from two or more opposing forces competing over some kind of limited resource. We have the main characters, one of those forces, and then the forces that oppose them are technically all antagonistic forces. So in this movie, the resources they're competing for are power and control over people, in particular the people of Barbie Land. And that's a finite resource, and how that power shifts changes over the course of the story. And that has to do with how Barbie is overcoming the obstacles, overcoming those conflicts. So at the beginning, the obstacle is just like something weird is happening and she needs to find out why and how to fix it. But then that goal morphs as she realizes the conflict is much deeper than that. This causes new obstacles and new conflict. Getting to the real world, realizing Mattel can't fix the problem, they can take over, even her own internal struggles with perfectionism. So we can point to each of these and determine what antagonistic force creates those conflicts. So for example, with getting to the real world, the antagonistic force, I am not going to be able to say that.
No, we're saying it too much already. It's just not going well.
We'll just call it the bad guys now. The antagonistic force there is really the separation between the real world and Barbie Land. This one is pretty simple and like to overcome and is actually kind of fun. We get those fun little montages of her going from, Barbie Land to the real world. And so the writers actually made this more challenging by having Barbie agree to bring Ken along, who is another antagonist. So antagonistic forces and conflict go hand in hand. If you have an antagonist or antagonistic force that isn't creating conflict, then it might be time to reevaluate that.
Yes. All right. So let's get into how to develop the antagonist. The most important thing to remember with all your characters, but especially the antagonist, is that we're all the hero of our own story. Everyone has a little bit of main character syndrome. No one exists solely to oppose another person, and your antagonist shouldn't either. They should be complex people in their own right. The most important thing to do when making your antagonist is to create their GMC, their goal, motivation, conflict. We get into GMC in another episode that, of course, you should go listen to if you haven't already. But basically it is, what does your character want? Why do they want it? And what is in their way? Usually with an antagonist, the answer to what is in their way is your main character.
Yeah.
But what they want and why they want it is how readers are going to connect to the characters themselves. It's really important that your reader connects to your antagonist. Otherwise, they'll feel like they solely exist to antagonize your main character. And while honestly, they do solely exist to antagonize your main character, it's not a very interesting person. So we want real antagonists and real people to connect to. You should, in theory, be able to write the book from their point of view. I often instruct authors to write a scene from the antagonist's point of view as an exercise. What is motivating them? How do they view your main character? What do they notice and pay attention to? What seemingly harmless thing is very important to them? Now, unless you're writing a book with an antagonist's perspective, this won't make it into the book. But it's a really useful exercise because it helps you flesh out your antagonist and really see who they are and how they function as a person. So in this movie, we get this a lot with Ken. One of Barbie's biggest realizations is that Ken is a person too. In the beginning of the movie, she sees him almost as an accessory, which is honestly how most people view Ken dolls.
It's true.
And her view of him and his exposure to the patriarchy in the real world is what pushes Ken to become villainous. His character arc is as compelling as Barbie's. The reason we all want I Am Knuff hoodies is because his journey and arc is completely relatable. He feels maligned, used, forgotten, unimportant, but he learns that he can be enough just as he is. He learns to not define himself in relation to Barbie or other people. So his antagonistic role means that the things he tries to do come in direct conflict with what Barbie wants, but in the end they realize that their goals don't actually have to conflict with one another. So once Ken realizes that what he really wants is to be enough for someone, not that he wants to rule the world, and things like that. Basically all this goes to show your antagonist needs a GMC and a character arc, just like your main character. They should reach for things, they should grow, learn, even discover the lie that they've believed in their whole life, which is another episode you should listen to if you haven't. Just make them real people with real motivations and real goals that conflict with your protagonist.
Yeah, so when you're developing an antagonistic force or an antagonist, it's really important to consider what characteristics that strong antagonistic force needs for your specific main character, because not every character is going to find the same things challenging. Your antagonistic forces don't all have to be pure evil. The antagonist doesn't have to be a foil or a mirror for the main character, but they do need to challenge them. And characters, like real people, are challenged when they're made to do hard things that they would normally avoid or ignore. So a strong antagonistic force is one that pushes your character out of their comfort zone and into a position where they have to make decisions and take actions on the things that they normally wouldn't. So in the movie, Barbie's outlook changes because she starts having these thoughts about death. Also in that scene, she's like at this party and she's dancing, and all of a sudden, everybody else is having a great time, and all of a sudden she's just like, hey, you guys ever think about death? And I was like, this scene is calling me out, because this is why I never went to parties.
Yeah.
I would go and sit with weird Barbie in the corner and we would just talk about if you'd ever had thoughts about death. So yeah, it was a little too real for me. But so she has this sort of shift in her thought process, and that's really what causes her to have a new goal. It causes these changes in her life that she has to try to figure out what to do with. And all the other Kens and Barbies are still perfectly happy in their goals of living their best lives because they haven't had that shift in perspective. So even just in the beginning of the movie, we see that this one particular character has that GMC, that goal, motivation, and conflict, which means that her obstacles are different from the other characters around her. So when you're determining this for your own character, consider what is hard for them already before the story even starts. What's their emotional wound? What is their lie? Which, like Carly said, we have previous episodes that goes a lot more in depth on a lot of this. We just don't have time to go into all of it again now. So what's most precious to them? What would they give anything to do or be or have? What are the character's strengths and what are their flaws? And so then your antagonist or antagonistic forces are the key to challenging these issues for your protagonist.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so an important thing to remember is that the antagonist and antagonistic force must present a clear and genuine threat for your main character. So as Jenny just explained, your antagonist/antagonistic force is going to be created to genuinely cause conflict for your character. They are created as a way to push your character and to be in their way. And to do that, they need to be a genuine threat. They can't be something easily ignored. And this is where stakes come in.
Woo, stakes.
Woo, stakes. So, how does your antagonist threaten the stakes? We often come back to stakes throughout this podcast because they are basically the potential for loss. And your antagonist needs to threaten the main character with that loss. It doesn't need to be as overt as a rival threatening to steal their love interest, but it can be something that they stand to gain at your character's loss. So now that I think about it, I kind of like that as a definition for antagonist. Basically someone that will gain from your character's loss. because like stakes and that fear of losing something is often what a lot of conflict comes down to. And your antagonistic force is a representation of that conflict. Anyway, I'm just going to bask in my own brilliance. It's fine.
We're used to that.
Yeah, it's a great new definition. So, it's great. In this movie, Ken very clearly will gain from Barbie's loss. The whole of Barbie land will be in his control, and he will have taken it away from Barbie. Mattel itself just wants to sell products, so they also want to control Barbie Land because they will be able to control the products and direct the power that Barbie Land has over the real world, which is confusing and subtle, but very cool.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to take away Barbie's power, including the patriarchy, because that's what the patriarchy does. It steals power.
It's not about horses.
It's not about horses, unfortunately. We would all get behind it if it was about horses.
It's possible. It's possible.
The antagonists and the antagonistic forces all gain from Barbie's loss. They are a genuine threat to what she wants, and by stripping her of her power, she will lose out on her goals. So always make sure your antagonistic forces have the power to create loss for your main characters. Without that true threat, they are weak antagonists that can basically be ignored. Because what is at stake for your character needs to be threatened to even be at stake at all. And that sounded confusing, but you get it, and I trust that my nonsense makes sense on some level.
Sure, let's go with that.
It made sense.
As I was thinking about all of this leading up to recording this episode, I kept coming back to all these theories about, and I found myself like thinking this in direct relation to what I thought I was going to say. So like X makes the perfect antagonist. So like in writing circles and fandoms, I see a lot of discussions like the perfect antagonist has to have like sympathetic motivations, or they have to be all but unstoppable. So two extremes I often see are that they need good intentions, but they go about it in a harmful way. So like Magneto in X-Men, like,
Yep.
And then on the other side of that is like the perfect antagonist is just evil and has no real rationale behind their villainous ways, a la the Joker and Batman. So they can't be reasoned with. So are all of my examples from comic books? Maybe. This is something I talk with my comic book loving husband a lot. So for writers, I think that this is the kind of thing where it's easy to fall into a stuck place with it. If you buy into one of these ideas that like an antagonist or antagonistic force has to be X. So if you have seen discussion that makes you believe all antagonists should be exact opposites of your protagonist, for example, this might feel very limiting and could create problems for you as you develop your characters more on the page. Sometimes really good antagonists are exactly like your protagonist and just have, they want the same thing, but maybe for different reasons. So it's really important to realize that the quote unquote best antagonists don't have set rules for what any antagonist must be or do or look like. Like some are straight up villains, others might be unlikable, but not really bad, just kind of making things difficult for your protagonist. Like a teacher your teenage main character doesn't like. Some of them aren't even people. They can be weather, they can be technology, they can be social constructs like patriarchy. And then there's all this stuff inside a character. So just stay focused on creating antagonistic forces that challenge your particular main character, that are well developed and engaging, and that create conflict, like we've said here. And then beyond that, just have fun with making them be mean to your main characters.
Yeah, I always say it's the most fun to poke at their emotional wounds, so that's what your antagonist is for.
It is. That's where that whole like ending up in a novel comes from. Like, careful, or you're going to end up in a novel. And someone will be mean to you.
Yes. And I mean, this brings up a good point that we've only really touched on a little bit, and that's that antagonistic forces are also often really internalized. Like Barbie is struggling with the patriarchy in her own internalized understanding of who she is. So like, don't feel that they are always external. This movie also brings a lot of that internal, like Jenny was saying.
Right.
So It's a balance, basically. That force should be both internal and external.
Right.
All right. Next month, we are watching the Halloween/Christmas classic, The Nightmare Before Christmas. And don't forget to check out our playlists on YouTube that pair up our top episodes for certain topics you may be working on. We've got all of our episodes on story structure together, just as an example. If you want any other types of playlists, please let us know.
You can find our podcast on our website, storychatradio.com. You can also follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and many other streaming services. While you're there, please leave us a rating. You can also follow us on X/Twitter. I have not yet gotten around to calling it X in my mind yet.
Nope.
And Instagram @StoryChatRadio.
Thanks for joining in our nonsense.